control, but everything's looking peach now.
Cool, we'll get started. So welcome everyone. There's probably a few more coming, but that's okay. So we'll begin with an acknowledgement of country, and on behalf of my team and everyone here tonight, I would like to pay my respects to the rightful owners of the land and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. For me, that is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to them and to their elders past, present and emerging. So welcome to our event tonight. For those of you who don't know who we are and who Halad is, we're actually not solely a Gamsat company. We're a not-for-profit that runs health impact missions at the moment, mainly focusing on mental health missions in the Philippines. So you can check out our website later and read more about that and about what we've been up to recently, and some of the projects that we run in country in the Philippines. But running Gamsat programs, most of us at Halad are med students, and running these Gamsat programs and helping you guys get into med helps us not only with spreading our impact, but also funds those missions in the Philippines. So essentially all of our profits go to the charity efforts and targets that we have. So that's who we are. Probably even would have updated numbers since this, but since 2020, we've impacted 3,500 students and raised over $70,000 by people studying with us through the Gamsat to send over to resource our programs in the Philippines. So something very exciting that just happened literally a month ago is we opened up our first Halad to Health safe space, which is free mental health support, particularly for youth in the Philippines, and it's running in local shopping centres at the moment, and we're continuing to spread it. We also do a lot of this in schools to help young people access mental health services. So that's what we do outside of our impact and more in the Gamsat space, which is probably more what you guys are here and interested in. Our Gamsat philosophy is all about the bigger picture, and we actually care obviously about still helping you to get good Gamsat scores and good med interview results, but also on how to work towards becoming an incredible medical professional, which all of my colleagues here tonight, I can attest, are going to be terrific doctors, and I'm grateful to work with all of them. So today's tutors that we have with us, we have Prav, who'll be running section 1. He's one of our section 1 tutors. And we have Grace, and she is a section 2 tutor. And then we'll have Mark jumping on a little bit later for section 3. All of them are in med school, all in, Grace and Prav, you're in the same med school. Yes, okay. So not all in different med schools. So feel free to also ask them some questions if you'd like to about what med life is like. So Grace and Prav are in 2nd year and Mark is in 1st year. So feel free to ask them a bit. I'm old, I'm in 4th year, so it might be more boring to ask me questions about what it's like getting into med. So how will tonight run? What will we actually be doing? So we want to give you a little bit of a taste or a little starter on prepping for the Gamsat, seeing where you're at, things like that, giving you a few techniques and a few tips from our tutors. So you're going to have a go at part of a Gamsat exam. So you'll do 8 questions for section 1. And then after that, Grace, the Prav, section 1 tutor, will explain the answers and highlight some of the things people struggled with, answer any of your questions, and go over how people went. So we'll do that for all of the sections. Section 2 will run slightly differently because you're writing rather than answering questions. But while I finish explaining how this will go, I'm just going to launch a quick poll that you can all fill out. So that's what we will do tonight. I think, great. Resetter, first timer. All right, I think most of you have answered it. Okay, so it looks like 2/3 of you are resitting the Gamsat and 1/3 have not sat it before. So we'll do a little explainer at the start of each section. And it looks like most of you have come along to something with us before, but welcome to our newbies for that as well. Okay, so what we'll do is I will be sending you all of the links and everything that you need to be able to actually do the questions. And then I will display a timer as well so that you know how long you have left. So let me get that organized. And we should be good to go. So in the Zoom chat, I'm going to put two links for everybody. The top link will have all the questions that you need, and the bottom link is where you will put your answers. It's just a Google form. So for section 1, for those who haven't sat the Gamsat before, you probably know a little bit about it already, but all you need to do is read the texts and then answer the multi-choice questions, and they're sort of comprehension style questions. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of what to do for the next 15 minutes. If you have no idea, just have a go, and then you'll find Prav's advice very valuable when he goes through things. So can I get like a thumbs up or a nod from someone that those links are working? Yes, brilliant. Love that. Okay. Great. So that's time. So before I hand over to Prav, I'm just going to ask if anyone's able to turn on their Zoom camera. That would be amazing so that we can see your faces. And also at any time, please feel free to send a message in the chat. If you're feeling a bit shy, you can send it privately to me or Prav, and we'll answer it for you. Cool. So I'll hand over to you now.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, congrats on guys finishing on your first section 1 for the mock exam. I'll just start my own timer so I make sure we get to the handover on time. So yeah, we might as well just jump straight into it, and okay, so talk all from there. So I'll start with showing everyone the results from the quiz you just did. So this is the breakdown of questions. So we'll start with the first text and question 1. So for those playing at home, the correct answer for that question was A. And you can actually see a pretty 50-50-ish breakdown. So 9-5, maybe not 50-50, but 60-40 breakdown between those who got the right answer and those who maybe got an alternative answer as well. So let me go through and talk you through that question and then just give you an explanation. So yeah, so the correct answer for question 1 in regards to this play by Oscar Wilde is question A. So Algernon believes that the servant class have a moral obligation to set a good example. So I won't talk too much about strategy in terms of test taking unless I have a bit of time at the end. But if you ever come to one of our Halad classes, we often talk about 2 ways of trying to get to an answer. You can either sort of get direct textual evidence and find the answer that supports one of the options available, or alternatively, you can sort of eliminate all the other options based on the textual evidence and then get a correct answer sort of in a reverse way. For me, when I was doing this morning by myself, I came to the answer sort of through that first method based on the textual evidence available. And so the key line, unfortunately, I can't edit the document, but if I was, I would highlight this line here. The key line for this answer is Algernon's statement here, basically mentioning that talking about how servants of the lower class in the society, Victorian England, sort of lack moral responsibility. In saying that, that sort of textual evidence sort of supports most directly options A and option C. Option D is maybe sort of implied, but doesn't have any direct textual evidence throughout the text itself. So you can sort of usually eliminate that. And from the options we saw, most of you guys did. Secondly, B also doesn't really have much textual evidence. It's more of a statement of fact by Algernon rather than any sort of opinion about the servant class. So with option A and C, it obviously looks very similar in options, but there's a subtle sort of, I guess, finesse to it in terms of the options available here. With option A, Algernon is sort of saying, well, the sort of lower classes, the servant classes have to set a good example for the upper classes. and that's their sort of responsibility. Whereas with C, he's saying that, well, the lower classes sort of have to have that moral responsibility to be of any use. Now, if you look at the text very carefully, he's sort of equating the use and sort of the usefulness in quotation marks of servants and the sort of the lower classes in his eyes to that of setting a good example for the higher classes. Again, it says here, really, if the lower orders don't set us a good example, what on earth is the use of them? So, and the sort of key here is don't set us a good example. So being us being the higher classes. So that textual evidence lends itself more to the answer given in option A, that the lower classes have a moral obligation to set a good example. And the implication here probably means if, you know, the sentence kept going on to the higher classes, but that isn't written out there. It isn't written out there textually. Cool. Any questions about it? Also, if anyone has any questions, like as I'm talking through this, please just feel free to like unmute or text or, you know, send me a message and I'll stop and try to answer that as we fly along. Cool. So we'll go on to question 2 here. So this one was done pretty well. It seems like most people got the correct option, which was C. There was a bit of a split between B and D, but no one picked A there. So let me bring up that question as well. So here we have a question asking whether or not what the relationship between Jack and Algernon is. And here you can sort of say, so we said here, they're derived from the same social class. So as you're reading through the text, one thing you notice is as it's sort of like a play, there's 2 distinct stages in this text. The first stage between Lane and Algernon, which is very formal, very regal, and sort of fits with that from the previous question, that the fact that Algernon is clearly of some kind of higher status than Lane. But the language becomes much more colloquial, much more conversational between Algernon and Jack. So in this question, you're sort of looking, at least in the way I would have done it personally, and everyone sort of has their different methods. You're sort of looking at sort of the broad strokes of what is happening in the first act and how that differentiates to the second act. If you're talking in much more of a colloquial term, again, people, they're using full names, they're using, you know, casual language. You're going to sort of assume that these people maybe are not friends, but at least at the same level to have that conversation. Again, there's not any textual evidence to suggest that these 2 are business partners, family members. Again, there's no direct textual evidence to suggest that. Again, they might be in the grand context of the play be family members, but in this excerpt, and that's one thing, if you ever come to any of our classes, we always sort of harp on about only use what's really in front of you. There's no direct textual evidence in the text itself to suggest that they're family members. And with D, it's a bit hard. D is a bit hard to sort of quantify, but again, because they're having such a colloquial sort of a colloquial kind of conversation, it's kind of hard to say that they're sort of guarded or not, you know, sort of holding back from each other. So C is probably the most likely answer given those contexts. Cool. So we'll move on to 3. So 3 was done reasonably well. Again, 8 people here in our chat group here got the right answer, but there's a bit of a split between A, B, and to a lesser extent C as well. And I think of all the questions in this text, C is obviously the hardest. Here is asking about the tone of the conversation for that between Algernon and Jack. So here we've said it's amused and aloof. So based on some of the answers we gave in the previous questions, but based on what the analysis I've sort of said before, we've sort of suggested that this conversation is quite colloquial, it's quite friendly, and that these people are sort of talking to as if they're sort of friends in a sense. So it's not really regal and splendidful. That may be more reserved for Algernon and Lane, where there's obviously a clear sort of role distinction, and, you know, Lane here saying no sir, yes sir, sort of more formal language. So that would more fit with that first half, but not really between Algernon and Jack. It's not really guarded or tactless. Again, we see here they're talking about sort of having a bit of a muse. They're joking about sort of country life in a sense. So it's not really guarded. They're being quite open about their sort of lifestyles at the moment. So that doesn't really fit in, and doesn't really fit with the sort of tactless label that's being attached as well. But it's neither earthly and assured. obviously these guys, you know, it's sort of, if you have sort of think about in the greater context of the play, but these guys are sort of talking about going into the country, sort of going and amusing themselves with other people. It's not really grounded in sort of the day-to-day lives that you would find sort of up here, for instance. So it's not really earthly in that sense. But then it does fit that idea of being amused and aloof. Again, Jack talking about amusing himself in the country, but also sort of being very detached from that sort of reality that's happening there, if that kind of makes sense to people. Oh, so someone's just popped in. Cool. Sweet. So I'll continue moving on to the next text as well. And please, if anyone has any questions or wants any clarifications, or wants a different definition as well, just please pipe up. Sweet. So
I'm just going to ask you one question before we move on to the next text. I know a lot of people struggle with texts that are like a dialogue or a play. I think this is both. What would be your top tip or technique for this kind of text type?
So my top tip and techniques for this text type are, for one, when you all have some kind of scrap piece of paper in the exam, I'm not sure if they've changed the numbers over the years, but it should be at least one for section 1 and 2. In that, break up the text, break up that sheet of paper, and for this question specifically, write the characters. Now, usually these will have probably no more than 5 characters. I can't see Ace putting more than 5 characters. Write the character's name down and write their qualities of what they're doing in the text. Try to track what they're doing and what their emotional state is doing. The other tip I give, and this is more specifically for me and people who maybe think like me as well, is because with play text, they seem long, but actually there's not a lot of text and material sometimes presented in that. What I find sometimes is helpful is to actually read the questions first and then get a context of what Ace is trying to ask you, and then going through the text. Now that's the opposite approach I have for, say, this philosophical text, where, because there's a lot, it's quite content dense, philosophical texts tend to be. So I tend to try to read the text, get a whole picture, and then look at what Ace is asking me to break down in terms of questions. So that reversal of strategies, depending on first how dense it is and also how long it is. Those are probably my 2 tips that, if you guys came to my class, hopefully I do see some of you guys in my class, that I would give specifically for play text like this. Cool. Just noting the time. I don't want to eat into Grace's time. So this is a nice philosophical text, probably my favorite of the 2, here. I always like harping on about philosophy and philosophical ideas. So this is a nice text talking about the idea of solipsism, apologies, but it doesn't really give a definition of what solipsism is. It's more just the author's thoughts on this particular type of ideology, philosophy. And I have a nice counterexample. We'll look at that. Have a nice counterexample for that at a later point. So let's go into the question. So this was done very, very well. A lot of people got that question correct. So 15. So I won't give too much, put too much energy into explaining it, since most of you guys got it. But most of you guys correctly sort of identified that basically the author in this text, towards the end especially, is hedging her bets, arguing that just in case sophilism is not true, the consequences for not believing it are far greater than the cost of being a good person. I think when I was reading through the options and doing this myself, I was just trying to see this was the one. The option B sort of seems on initial reading very similar as well. But again, what the author is trying to get through to this text is that she is a proponent of sophilism. She believes in herself. And not that she cares too much about the consequences to other people, which is what question B is sort of implying. She's more worried about the consequences to herself. So in more of a selfish sense, whereas B sort of suggests that she's a bit more, I guess, for lack of a better word, egalitarian, thinks about other people, whereas B is more specifically the consequences for herself in that sense. That's the sort of subtle difference between option B and C. And I think most of you guys picked that up by the fact that not a lot of you actually picked up B in that question. So that was very well done. Cool. I'll move on to question 5. So this is asking about what is the sort of definition, or which of the following from the text is best describes the definition of sophism? So again, we don't get a foolproof definition of sophism from the text, but we still can apply what it's asking from based on what the author is writing about. So question 5, again, done very well, although there's a bit of a split with B here. So again, for D, we're saying that it is asking is just an element of the subconscious. A lot of people said B as well, that is a personal belief. Now, I think when you look at questions, you should sort of look at them as a very literal sense. So they're asking for a definition of sophism. So in the sense that what can we say sophism as a philosophy is defined as? It is personal belief, but so is a lot of other philosophical schools of thought. That isn't a definition of sophism itself. I think the key text here is, there's a couple of key sort of lines here, but one of them is this sort of last line here where the author is sort of boiling down her own thoughts, sort of saying like whether the world is external to our thoughts, is it as it appears or it isn't. I think that sort of gives a key away to what sophism is. And most of you picked up that it's just an element of our subconscious. For those playing at home or who have Google, sophism is this idea based on what I did quickly Google searched, that everything beyond our mind doesn't exist. So everything kind of just exists in our mind, and we're the only person we can trust in that sense. So all you guys, if I believe in sophism, all you guys don't exist in real life. You're just a glorified computer simulation in my mind, for instance, if I was to boil that philosophy down. So that's that sort of idea. Trying to think if there's any other good lines. I think that last one really does give away sort of what the philosophy is. Yeah, so that other bit is in the central section here. What if none of this were real? Which is sort of the central component of what sophism is arguing. Oh, but I don't have time, so I better move a bit quicker on. Cool. Next is question 6. What is the author of this text value? And for most of you guys, surgery was done. The correct answer is A. Well, a lot of people answered C. So let's have a look at this one, and I'll just quickly move through it. So the correct answer was A, kindness in the context of the consequence. C is self-preservation at all costs. So again, I think when I was reading through the answers, I could see how most people would get a split between A and C here. It's kind of clear if, you know, we take sophism as a very selfish philosophy to say that, oh, then the author wants to have self-preservation at all contexts. But a key criteria that she says here towards the end is she's here hedging her bets about the consequences of being self-preservation, of just preserving, doing everything to her own benefit, especially if sophism is not true. The idea sort of up here comes again, the idea of consequentialism. If you do wrong stuff and other people do exist, there are consequences. So the subtlety here is that in some sense, she's negating some of her self-preservation, because self-preservation should be in the very little context, which is what this question is sort of, I presume, looking at, is doing everything regardless of the consequence. So like, for instance, I think she mentions here murdering her loudmouth next door neighbor. That could be a self-preservation technique because, you know, the neighbor is annoying, but she's negating that idea of self-preservation for the greater good, just in case there are consequences for killing that neighbor, even though it's not the best for her self-preservation in this context. If that kind of makes sense to people, it's a bit of a subtlety in this philosophical argument. So that's why A is correct over C. With seven, let's quickly flip in. Oh, 7. Again, a lot of people got put C instead of B. So B was the correct answer here, in that everything is just a figment of my imagination, as opposed to the world external to our thoughts is what it appears to be. So C is more the, is more the author sort of tossing up her options, but less so her conviction in her belief. And we see this in that she says, let's see, you know, it says up here that, you know, sophism at best is her own personal belief. And then mentions sort of her own examination of that philosophy in the sort of second sentence, leading into this third sentence. It's only at the end where she starts to question her own belief, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she believes as a personal belief in this uncertainty of thought. She's just more making a self-statement of fact. In that sense, especially I think that last line, again, I think this line down here is very key, where she's saying like, whether the external world is just in our thoughts. I think that's more indicative of her own personal opinions. And that's why she's saying like, the external world is very much just a figment of the author's imagination. Again, in line with the philosophy of sophilism, which is what she believes in. Finally was 8, again, long tab, was done decently well. Again, a bit of a split between A, B, and C. So we'll have a bit of exploration of that. So with the text suggests that sophilism is, so I'm just going to check that, yeah, B, does not exempt human kindness from being necessary. So there was a bit of split between A here and C here. So sophilism doesn't misconstrue the definition of consequentialism. There isn't any sort of definition of consequentialism given except for the author's own examination of that in the second paragraph, where she basically talks through what consequentialism means in a sort of a real world context in which people's actions have real world consequences. But it doesn't, she's not saying anything that sophilism misconstrues that ideal or anything like that. She's just sort of stating that as a counterfactual, if you read through the text, a counterfactual to the idea of sophilism. In terms of A, sophilism is an appropriate justification for self-initiation. So this is a bit of a counterpoint to the correct answer B. So she does mention that sophilism, especially in this sort of third paragraph here, has that ability to be very selfish. Again, doing things for yourself because everything doesn't exist. But then she hedges her bets that's saying that if sophilism is not true, then, you know, it can't be that, you can't be that selfish because there are real world consequences. So the key here, and the explanation I have on my iPad as well, is that sophilism, and this whole text is sort of going through, especially that last bit where she's a bit uncertain, the author is really much exploring that sophilism, while she believes in it, it's hard to prove as a philosophical context. And as such, she's hedging her bets that if it doesn't actually exist, it's best to have human kindness. And that's why it says human kindness is necessary, because if you can't prove sophilism, you need that aspect of human kindness to avoid the consequences, for instance, if everything else has real meaningful consequences to it. I know that's a bit of a philosophical discussion. I'll just leave you with one thought, and I would love to, if you ever any of you guys come into my class, I would love to talk more about it. But I'll leave you the idea, if any of you guys are philosophical nerds out there, about Pascal's gamble, which is this text is derived from that. But the idea is that in Pascal's gamble is that we can't prove that God exists. So if you can't prove that a God exists and there's an afterlife, the best way to hedge your bets is to assume that there is an afterlife so that you can get into it if it exists. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. But in that sense, hedge your bets to the safer option, which is what essentially is a version of that gamble in this form of talking about sophilism. Cool. Oh, there might be some questions here. Sorry, Gabby, I am running over time. I'm so sorry. Hey, Herman. I'm not too sure about the dictionary question, Herman. I believe there might be special conditions when you might get a dictionary, but the best way is just to read up the formal document that ASA sends out every Gamsat cycle. It doesn't update that much. So there's probably one for the March sitting that's out there that probably clarifies the role of dictionaries. What do we do if we don't know the meaning of certain terms, like tactless? Okay, cool. That's a good question. So we try in our sort of 6-week classes to sort of give you as many terms that often pop up over and over again through a lot of practice. But obviously you may just encounter terms you do not know. With terms you don't know, it depends where they turn up. If they turn up in the text, the best way I find is just to read around it and see if you can get the context from everything that's around it. Very rarely is a single word in a text or in a unit such a linchpin that if you don't know it, the whole text falls apart. That's rarely ever the case. I don't think I've ever encountered it myself. Jack, is it Janaki? I'm sorry, apologies. Yeah. If it's in the question itself, again, try to use the question to sort of get the context or use the text to provide the context for that term. But hopefully the terms that come up in the ACE exams that tend to be quite repetitive, like you tend to get things like TAC lists coming up every now and then. So hopefully through the lessons we've been learning, if you ever come to our 6 weeks course, we'll touch on most of those important terms, especially in regards to the topics of philosophy and poetry that you will likely to encounter, and we'll try to get you the widest breadth then possible, but also give you strategies to make sure that if you do encounter a term that you just do not know and we have never covered, that you have strategies to deal with it and get roughly to the correct answer in that sense. Cool. Apologies for that, Sarah. I know I ran out of time, so I'll pass you over to you for section 2.
You're all good. Thank you so much, Prav. So before we move on to section 2, I will just make sure we have everything we need and share the timer. And I'll give you a bit of a little rundown on what you need to do in case you haven't done much section 2 prep before. So, all right, here we go. So in section 2, usually you will be given a prompt. So the prompt will contain a few quotes, and then you need to work out what the main theme or topic is being presented to you through the quotes, and then write a response to that. You can write the response in any way you like, and then that response should be reflecting your views on it and should have good examples and should have a clear progression of your ideas. So that's the gist in a minute. It's obviously a little bit more complicated than that. What we would like you to do tonight is, I have no expectation that anyone will be able to write a whole thing in 20 minutes. So what we will do is, it's up to you. You can use the 20 minutes to write a plan, or you can use the 20 minutes to write a mini essay, or you can use the 20 minutes to start and then you can finish it off later. So it's up to you how you use it. But what I would love everyone to do is to give it a go. So look at the prompt, think about what you would want to say about this topic and have a go writing something. And then Grace is going to go over some tips on how to maximize that planning phase, on how to deal with the prompt. And in general, she'll look at some of your answers if you've ticked that you're happy for us to share them with everybody anonymously. And then she'll go over some and give some feedback as well. So same as before, and I find with section 2, people have quite a few questions. You're welcome to ask questions. Now, if you get stuck, if you start and you go, oh my goodness, I can't think of anything to write, rather than sitting there silently for 20 minutes, feel free to send Grace or myself a message and we'll help you to get started. We would rather you ask us and reach out rather than sit and do nothing for 20 minutes. Cool. Can I get a thumbs up if that makes sense and everyone's been able to access the prompt? Oh, great. Okay, I'm getting some thumbs up now. Cool. So I will set the timer. I have to change it to 20. Okay. Grace, do you have anything to add?
No, that's it. Just have a go as best you can, and then also that if you're not comfortable with sharing, the submission form has a no button to say that, so you can always opt out of that. But if you are keen to share, it's free personal advice, so give it a go.
Amazing. Cool. And I'll try and let you guys know when you have 5 minutes left and a minute left so that you don't get lost in time. But you can start. Okay, great. So same as before, if you're able to put on your camera, that would be terrific. And we'll hand over to Grace.
All right. Hello, everyone. Just while I begin, keep on submitting your things into that form, and it doesn't matter whatever sort of state they're in, if they're not finished or they've just a plan or anything is good. And I'm going to just share the prompts as a starting point for discussion. Okay, is that working? Yeah. So you've got 5 prompts here, and I might go through just how I would have broken them down because it looks like quite a few of you are first-time sitters as well. So you've got 5 prompts there, and a lot of quite common sort of pitfall that a lot of people make is there's a lot of detail and a lot of breadth covered in those 5 prompts. And so people can get really overwhelmed. And so what I would like to normally do is I'll read them all 5 through first and try to make 1 or 2 words about what I think all of them mean. In this context, I would say that all of them seem to be about travel. So after that, though, it can also still be, and I like from getting a few messages in the chat there, it can also be difficult to use that one word or one topic as a springboard of where to go. So just breaking it down before we get into a sample essay is that I would create 1 sentence or 1 question for myself from those 5 prompts that encourages an opinion of me to respond to, and then I would try and use that as my contention. So in this setting, and everyone will read into it differently, but in this setting from these 5 prompts, I would sort of think like that they're about self-development through challenging ourselves, and one of the best ways we can do that is through travel. And in my head, I would sort of try and take that apart, spend 5 minutes thinking about that, maybe write a plan, and then go into your arguments. So I hope that gives a good starting point. And we might go to some examples, some anonymous examples of what you've written. But before I move to that, is there any questions that people have about the prompts that they wanted to ask before we did read through some work? And feel free to put it in the chat as well. Okay. I think we're all good. So I'll just share a new share screen and look to those student examples. Okay. Can everybody see that that page there? Yeah, cool. So just having a read through, we'll read through this first example for a couple of minutes, and then we'll go through it as well. So this is my first time reading it as well, and I'm a slow reader. So I'm hoping that by the time I finish, everyone else will be too. Okay, can we get some like thumbs up or turn your cameras on and give me a nod if everyone's finished reading through? Awesome. Cool, couple of thumbs up there. So there's a couple of things that I really like about this essay. It gives, in the introduction, it's short and sweet, it's very to the point. It gives a sort of overarching, a very good overarching yet specific response to the prompts that allows for more detailed exploration in the paragraphs that follow. I think that I think that the direction that this essay has taken is definitely can be related to the prompts, but what I would probably like to see a little bit more in the introduction is a bit of a response more so to the theme of traveling and movement, because overall within the 5 quotes, that is a stronger theme that I think is coming through than the question of freedom, which I think this student's more so writing to. But you can definitely have written this essay and these thoughts on this prompt. I think that maybe just needs a little bit more explaining in the introduction to steer the essay down this path. So it's a good example of how you don't have to take the quotes so literally. You can really make what you want of any topic. Sort of the Gamsat and these prompts are made to be accessible. They really want you to be able to write on something that you know about, that is to your own personal experience. And so I like how this student's done that. The philosophical discussion in the body paragraphs as well is a really good way that you can approach a section 2 essay. It sort of speaks to examples without going down the route of quite literal examples, and I think that works well here, and it sort of brings in those hypotheticals both in both body paragraphs, which makes a nice flow on for the whole essay altogether. I think maybe, you know, because we only had 20 minutes, this is where it finishes, but what I would like to see from then on was maybe something more of a settled thought. There's the 2 body paragraphs there feel directly at odds with each other, and I would be excited to see where the decision is ultimately made by this student as to what they think of the overarching topic. I think sometimes it's very easy to sit on the fence in a section 2 response, but having a very clear resolution can help solidify the point that you're trying to make in and leave much more of an impression on your markers. So that's great. Does anyone have any? So we've got a question in the chat. Can you please make assessment as score after each example? Okay. It's very hard to give like a predicted Gamsat score based on just this sort of much essay. So I wouldn't give like a direct score, but I will give you an idea of maybe what ACE's marking criteria are and where I would respond to that. So ACE's, let me just remind myself, I pulled it up, but so ACE's 2 main marking criteria are 1, quality of thinking about the topic, and then 2, use of language demonstrated in development of that understanding. So you've basically got what we interpret it as thought and content, and then you've got your organization and expression. So in terms of thought and content, I think that this is good. I think that there's there's substance here and to what this person is thinking. In the way it relates back to the prompts, as I've said, I think that can be a bit stronger. So maybe that depth of thought could have been brought out a little bit more with more of a response to travel as the overarching topic. And then with organization and expression, overall this student expresses themselves quite well. There's sort of, I normally tend to stick to simplistic language. So in the Gamsat, I wouldn't be too worried about getting particularly fancy with your words. It's more about what you're saying than how you're saying it. So at times, I think you can be, we could cut down on some of that, the amount of adjectives used per sentence here. But overall, I think it's really well expressed. And that also extends to like spelling and stuff. You don't have to be too worried about spelling. All right. So does anyone have any questions or wants to, compliment this student on anything they picked out that they really liked about it either? And if not, we'll move on to the next one. All right. Yeah, I agree. Like it's and that's actually so Gianna said the metaphor of mind as water is really nice, and I definitely would agree. And I think overall this student has a very sort of melodic, also almost way of writing, and I think that's one of their strengths, is that rhythm and imagery. So thank you for that comment as well. And I'll move on to the second one. Okay, a couple of minutes to read and then we'll talk through. And if you want to put in some things that the student did well, or any questions, again, do that whilst you're reading in the chat. Okay, thumbs up if you guys have had a chance to read through. Yeah, okay, cool. Awesome. So maybe we'll actually get to hear from you if people want to enter into the chat what they thought was a strength of this essay. That would be excellent. And you can private message it to me as well. Okay. Not getting anything through the chat yet, so I'll start. What I like about this essay is you can see that they're slightly different styles from sample 1 to sample 2. And I like that we've seen that because it's really an example of how you can take the prompts and respond to it in any way that you like. So this is more of a sort of, I'd say a narration or like a narrative thought in terms of its writing style. And you can, I like that we've seen 2 different styles of essays because you can respond in any way you want, and you can respond creatively if you'd like. You could write a poem, a song, you could write a argumentative essay for task B or a more emotional essay for task A. So that's great. And we've got some things coming through now. So the intro was really good at directing towards complex ideas. I would definitely agree there. And bouncing off that, you can see how it, with taking it away from the geographical interpretation only and talking about travel as a life enriching experience, it opens the door to a broader and more personal discussion for this person. So, and we've got, I thought that noting how travel is not just restricted to, yes, that's also exactly what I thought too. So good, yeah, I like all this positivity coming through the chat here. That's great. Would anyone like to comment on things that they thought could be improved, or where they would like to see this essay go if it were to be finished off? Yeah, I think so. It could be a bit longer. Yeah, well, in 20 minutes, I think that this is a substantial amount. So yeah, if maybe we'd have the 30 minutes, that definitely could be, there could be more there, but it's often about quality and not quantity. Yeah, so ideas related to experience and knowledge in terms of travel. So I think what there can be room for the rest of this essay is delving into maybe some more specificity with the examples would really add to that broad personalized understanding of the prompts. We've said that they've really steered it in a direction that they can write about, and we can really get down to like the nitty gritty and something a little bit more niche with the examples. So I think what someone once said to me about the Gamsat was, and your section 2 thing was like, you want the marker to come away from reading yours being really interested, and even to the point where they're like, oh, that's really interesting, I want to go and learn more about that, or I want to go and Google that, or that's a perspective that I hadn't considered for that specific example or that specific point of view. And that helps when they're reading so many different essays for you to stand out. Although this is a personal take, some more specificity in the examples will make it extra different from others that might be submitting or having similar thoughts. So overall, I think, you know, you've both done really well. I'm not sure, I didn't set a timer for myself, so how am I doing for time, Sarah? We're like almost there.
All good.
Okay, cool. There was also another couple of questions that came through the chat, whilst we were writing that I think everyone would benefit from. So someone was asking about what makes a good introduction. And for that, I'd like to comment on the fact that a lot of people teach the Gamsat as though it's something that you can ascribe a formula to, and if you follow that formula, you'll be good and you'll get a good score. But you really can make it your own and do anything that you want. And as long as those two criteria are met, the quality of thinking and the use of language to demonstrate that thinking, as long as they're both good, you can do anything you like to with the introduction. So feel free to be as unique as you want, and I would just say find something that works for you and get lots of people to read it and lots of different people to give you feedback. Yes, and I think that's all I had for my response. So are there any other questions? I'll stop sharing. No. Well, I'll stick around for a little bit longer, and if you'd like to jump in the chat and direct message me as well, then or feel free, my email's at the start of the PowerPoint and I can put it through the chat as well. Feel free to email through any questions as well. And if you're taking the intensives, then I am taking a Section 2 intensive class, so I will see you there also.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Grace. So just before we move on as well, if you would like to get a bit of an idea of how you're tracking or compare something you write in Section 2 now to something later, you can come along to our intensives. We also, if you don't want to sign up for a course, we also do Section 2 marking that you can check out later. I'll send it all out after the event, and you could submit one now and then submit one in a couple months when you've practiced. Or if you want to do mock exams a little bit later, those are the only ones where you'll get an indicative Gamsat score. So I know that there was a question about that. Usually I wouldn't bother being like, we have this and this and this, but if you want more, how am I going? Is it like a low level, average, high level? Then submit it to some Section 2 marking or ask your tutors in your intensives courses. But if you want like, okay, this is roughly what Gamsat score this essay would get, then sign up for some mock exams and the tutors will compare yours to everybody else who sits them and you'll get an indicative score. So hopefully that answers that. So on that note, we'll pass on to Mark for Section 3.
Hey guys, what's going on? I am conscious of time, just don't want to kill everyone's night, but yeah, so just quickly, look, I assume most of you have some idea of what Section 3 in the Gamsat is, but essentially it's multi-choice A through D or A through E of, it's more problem solving and like graph interpretation, maths in the sort of under the guise of like chemistry, biology, physics. I know a lot of people that I tutor especially got really scared about not having physics knowledge and things like that. But really it's a problem solving and sort of graph interpretation question. And so in the questions I've created for tonight, they're loosely chemistry and physics, but really it's graph interpretation, maths, sort of trying to capture the things that I did. So when I did the Gamsat, I did it in September of 2020. And so I'm not too sure if Sarah introduced the start, but I'm first year at Melbourne Uni this year. So it took me a little while to get in. I'm freshly turned 26, and it's awesome. So please, if you feel like you're falling a little bit behind, please don't. It was a really long journey for me, but it's an awesome feeling. And I'm loving medicine so far, and hopefully I can help some of you guys get in. So yeah, I won't not too much preamble, get straight to the questions, just with time on our mind. I will say these questions are probably a little bit harder. I do like to throw in a lot of challenges, and I do sort of have a bit of fun with them in terms of some of the questions I made after going to a brewery on holiday. So please, if you're looking at these and it looks like Spanish to you, please don't be intimidated. We'll go through it and I'll try and talk through, and hopefully some things will come through and sort of we'll get something out of it. But yeah, so Sarah, maybe do a timer for 19 minutes. So what that'll do, we'll do 14 minutes, guys, and I'll give you a heads up at 14 because that's roughly what you'd get exam time. But I am conscious, A, my questions are a little bit longer than what in the exam, and B, I don't want to sort of be a bit demoralizing for people. So might maybe in there in about 15, 20 seconds, we'll sort of get a start on. But yeah, can someone please shoot in the chat if you're having any troubles accessing it, but it should be 7 questions. So 1 through 4 on wind chill factor and 5 through 7 on it's like bitterness in beer. All done. So we'll just try and get through a couple more. I've got 8 responses so far through. And if it makes you feel better, the average is just under 3. So look, hard questions, and that sort of is roughly in line with people that I tutored privately on these. So look, hard questions, please don't, I think everyone, if you haven't been through any sort of Gamsat stuff before, I think everyone has that sort of like, oh boy, this is what I'm getting myself in for moment where you sort of like, I remember first open night thing I did, just got completely rocked by it. Like I felt like chemistry, physics were my best subject in year 12, maths. I was like, okay, I should be right for this. Completely rocked. So please don't feel due despair. But hopefully you can get something out of the next sort of 15, 20 minutes when I talk through it. So I'll just screen share now. There we are. Okay. Beautiful. Can you guys just give me a little thumbs up if you can see? It should be me screen sharing. Awesome. Okay. So try and make this a little bit bigger for you. Okay. So I guess sort of a little bit behind the scenes, what sort of goes into my mind when I'm making these questions. As I said, I did the Gamsat in September 2020, so trying to recreate what I saw there. And I think if you've got sort of access to older materials, a lot of rote learning, a lot of applying your chemistry equations, things like that. I'm not to say that's not important. I think part of what helped me with my Gamsat section 3 especially, it was far and away my best subject, or like unit in it, was having sort of that physics and chemistry background. But I think it sort of only works as a foundation. I think if you're relying too heavily on that or rote learning, you're in for a hard time. So whilst these sort of have an element of that, it's really problem solving, it's graph interpretation. It's me, and these were trying to make interesting questions, but also recreate what I saw in the Gamsat to some degree. It's hard to make questions. But anyway, so I don't know, must have been cold one day and thought about wind chill factor and thought I'll make some Gamsat questions on this. So basically, the introduction it describes what wind chill is, but you really don't need to know that. This is sort of a bit of a window dressing, this description. There's nothing really that interesting in it. Really here, the way I'd be going through this question is spending almost all of my time on the graph. So I like to read the stem before I go through the questions. That's not to say I read every single word and I'm going to learn this URL back to front. But I think it's important to get your head around the question before you answer. I think reason being is that there are often questions, as mine did in question 4, which sort of encapsulates the whole question. And I think, or at least, uses up extra stuff. And I think if you just skip down to that, read that question and try to answer it or something like that, I think just like that's not the best example, but you can leave yourself exposed. And it happens surprisingly often where there'll be a question that sort of encompasses the whole idea of something. So I would personally advise reading the stem first if you can. But as I said here, I would sort of spend maybe 30 to 60 seconds, get my head around this graph, and then go from there. I wouldn't spend a ton of time. I'd sort of speed read the thing. But okay, so if I'm looking and then just sort of roughly how I break down the graph, on my axis, I've got temperature and I've got wind speed, and it's a little bit confusing. So you want to sort of, I'll annotate it just roughly, but this is increasing downwards and the temperature is getting colder to the right. And also I'm paying attention to my units here. So I've got kilometers per hour and degrees Celsius. So a little bit of a tricky graph. You will come across a lot of funky ones. So please get comfortable reading graphs. Really prioritize it. Super, super important. And then here we have a rough code. So we've got 30, 10, 5 minutes. So this is 5 minutes. This is 10, this is 30, and this is no frostbite over here. Here we've got a little bit of confusing formulas, which don't mean a lot to you. And here I've sort of given the conversion of Fahrenheit to Celsius. Also, this is there's some things that you do have to know. I would say that's a borderline thing that you need to know. It's sort of physics year 12, day 1 is converting kilometers per hour to meters per second. basically there's 1,000 meters in a kilometer, there's 3,600 seconds in an hour. So you convert it. I would try to learn something like that. But anyway, so that's sort of roughly how I would go about this question. Spend a minute getting my head around this graph. Okay, as we get colder, as the wind temperature goes up, it's getting even worse, and that's going to lead to shorter amount of frostbite time, i.e. it's going to take me less time in this temperature exposure to get frostbite. So, you know, I've sort of really labored it out there. I'm doing this all in my head in maybe a minute to 2 minutes before I'm attacking this question. But I think just getting my head around that really does pay dividends later in, because I'm going to have I'm going to have control as I go through these problems. Okay, so question 1. What would be the frostbite time for an individual exposed to winds of 20 meters per second at a temperature of -4 degrees Fahrenheit? Okay, so immediately there, hopefully you guys are picking up on a few things that I mentioned out. We've got our degrees Celsius there, that's in Fahrenheit. We've got kilometers per hour here. We've got that is at meters per second. So first thing is 20 meters per second. We're converting that into this into kilometers per hour. Sorry, other way around. We've got our kilometers per hour here. Meters per second to 20. We need to convert that to kilometers per hour for the graph. So look, I think if you guys do use calculators for these sort of things, please get out of the habit of it. Really get comfortable with shorthand maths, whether that is with a pen and paper or just in your head. I had times tables on the toilets when I was a kid, you know, sitting in front of them, and I just got really comfortable with that. So in my head, I can go, okay, 20 times by 3.6 is 72, but you should be able to at least estimate, go, okay, well, 35 by 2 is 70, or however works for you, but some way to make life easy for yourself in terms of playing with maths, because having maths in your back pocket is going to save you so much time. So that's the first thing. So in the explanation here, I've sort of given a few ways to do it. So the first step in this question is to convert 20 meters per second into kilometers per hour. So you can either multiply 3.6 by 20, as I did, or whether you want to do 2 by 36 or 2 by 35, whatever, just as long as you sort of, the key to approximating is to make life easy yourself without ostensibly changing the actual question that you're doing. And then for this next part, convert the Fahrenheit. So we're going from -4 Fahrenheit into Celsius. I chose a number here that makes life a little bit easier. So -4 minus 32 is -36 divided by 1.8. Hopefully you'd see that 36 divided by 18 is 2. So that's going to be equal to -20. And again, these can be a little bit scary, but please, if you can get away from using a calculator and the maths, if you do get calculator-free maths, generally it'll be in a form that's not too scary. If you can sort of get past that fear of it and put it into ways that you can make life easy for yourself. So, and then from there, it's just plugging those in. So we've got, let's say 70 kilometers per hour wind here, and we've got -20 degrees here. So we go down to our graph and we're sitting about here, and based on our color coding, it's 10 minutes. So 10 minutes. Yeah, that's generally with Gamsat, your first question in the block will generally be the easiest, and try not to overthink it too much. You know, if you do what I did in the start, get your head around the problem, generally the first question shouldn't take more than about a minute to get. And then that's sort of how when I make these questions, I try to build on and make them more challenging as we go through. Okay, here is a bit of a mean question. So I like to make mean questions that challenge people. What would be the effect on wind chill temperature if air temperature was lowered by 10 degrees? So careful here with what I said about these units here. If we're lowering by 10 degrees, we're going into the more negative, so we're moving to the right. Then, and wind speed was reduced by 20 kilometers per hour, that is going to be going up the graph. So you're going from, say, 60 to 40 degrees. So essentially what we're doing is we're moving in the diagonal right direction, like upwards right direction. Okay, but here has a bit of a trick question. So A, B, C, so lowered by 13 degrees, increased by at least 13 degrees, and wind temperature would be lowered. Yeah, so the first part of it is we're moving diagonally to the top right. For the most temperatures and wind speeds, the final wind chill temperature will be lower. So immediately we can eliminate B. And this is a good example here, like a tricky question. Generally, you can work through the answers and eliminate things. So the wind chill temperature would be increased by at least 13 degrees. That's not going to be the case. We're getting colder, so it'd be lower. So we can knock that one out. If you sort of look around on the graph, and if we're moving so diagonally right 2 squares, like that. We can see there's a lot of examples here where it's not going to be exactly 13. So that takes out A. Now, C, I think a lot of people would probably fall for this one, but and often when you get these sort of insufficient information, that's not the answer, and people will put if they just can't figure it out. Here, I was a little bit mean. So for a select number of cases of speed and temperature combinations, this would not be the case. E.g., 20 kilometers per hour wind at -20, -25, and -30 would all result in wind chill temperature being increased if the temperature was lower by 10 and wind speed was reduced. So if we go to those, so 20 kilometers per hour and -20, 25, 30. So here and here and here. So for each of those, so we've gone less negative, less negative, less negative when it goes to calm temperature. So look, me being mean, but it is teaching sort of to think about like plugging these numbers throughout the whole graph. And I guess sort of what I've said in the directions here, the way to get your head around this question is that you're moving diagonally to the top right. So once you can sort of get your head around that, and it becomes a pattern recognition thing as opposed to try to do like maths in your head. And anytime that you can do things like when I'm you get some scrap paper to work through. When I'm doing these questions or when I'm even teaching the classes and working through them, my scrap paper has like madman scribblings all over it. But what it is, it's me making the question a lot easier for myself so that I can consult my very shorthand drawings as opposed to having to do this maths in my head. So anytime that you can, and you sort of you pick these up as you do infinite number of questions, but anytime you can sort of pick up on a pattern, try to make life a bit easier. So that's a bit of a trick question for D there, but I would like to think at least if you could have gotten C, that's acceptable. I think with answers, like you can get things wrong, but you really shouldn't be getting A or B in that sort of question. So like, there's more wrong than others. Okay, here's a bit of a tricky one. So this is more maths heavy. So question 3, and I'll just sort of read the explanation just because it's a little bit easier. It's hard for me to make, it's easier for me to make a mistake on this one. Okay, so increasing temperature by 5 degrees is moving to the left one space. So again, taking things and making it into sort of a pattern recognition thing. Whilst increasing wind speed by 30 kilometers per hour is moving 3 spaces down. So again, we're seeing how getting my head around the graph at the start is helping me solve all these problems. For M1, the frostbite time at 17 degrees Celsius, -17, and 50 kilometers per hour is 30 minutes, whilst at -12 degrees and 80 kilometers per hour, it is unlikely that it would happen. So we're getting these numbers and then we're converting it to these times here. Based on the color of the graph and the lighter shading. For M2, the frostbite time is 10 minutes at -31 and 20 kilometers per hour, and as it would be also be at -26 and 50 kilometers per hour. Therefore, the frostbite time for M1 would increase and M2 would be the same, hence C is the correct answer. So with this one, this is a big one of how I would use my notes to work on this. So I'm writing down M1 is equal to -17 and 50 kilometers per hour, and then I'm taking away each of those. So, you know, I'd be using my working out here. And yeah, this is a sort of question that you can't really shortcut it. You just have to spend your time doing it. But this is also like, there's no real tricks in this question, right? Like that's almost like I don't consider them free marks, but this is a question that I think I can put my 2 minutes towards, and I should really be getting this one. Okay, so question 4, going for a different thing here. So I like to try and test sort of different forms of intelligence, almost you'd consider it. So this is calling on my research background. I did 2 years of concussion research and sort of like to, get people to understand like papers and things like that. And this is sort of more what you'd get in a biology question. I guess this STEM would loosely be classified as physics, but basically what the idea of this was that it was a study. We've got 12 people and it was getting to sort of consider these two things that are going on. So you've got sort of like circulation going around where basically the more adipose tissue you have, your internal organs are somewhat protected, right? I think about like wearing a big coat, for example, but because of this adipose tissue, the circulation is going to be impaired. So you're not getting this blood flow to the peripheral regions. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like there's, like we always think about like being overweight, high blood pressure, that's bad for circulation, things like that. You're not getting blood to your extremities, and that's what you need to stay warm because your blood's at 37 degrees, give or take. On the outside, it's going to be freezing. So if that's impaired, you're going to be more prone to it. So if we work through each of these answers, so A, due to increased insulation, they would be less susceptible to the effects of cold weather than an individual with less adipose tissue. See here, this is where the importance of words is really key. Less susceptible to the effects of cold weather. That's very non-specific. And hopefully when you're reading this sort of question, as you go through the different answers, they should like reveal itself to you. So if we compare that to B, due to increased insulation, they would lose core body heat more slowly. So that's a lot more of a specific wording. Lose core body heat rather than susceptible to the effects of cold weather, and is therefore less susceptible to hypothermia than an individual with less adipose tissue. If I'm doing this question in my head, I would use, like with these sort of questions where you work your way through the answers, I would do like, I had a symbols. So for this, I would do like a dot, which means like I'm indifferent to the answer. I don't think it's likely to be correct, but I'm not ruling it out yet because it is technically true. When I read an answer like this, I'm going to tick it. And please find whatever works for you, but as long as you can do this under time pressure. But then I read, and I'm not going to circle that just yet because I'm not, 1000% confident. I read C, due to increased insulation, less heat flows through the skin, resulting in faster cooling and greater risk of frostbite. Well, this is also true. So I'm going to go with D for that answer because they both sound right. But as you're reading through those answers, if you read through B and circle that, I would hope that you would, at the very least, see D, see that it has both B and C, and then go back to C. And these are just sort of things that you pick up as you sort of go through these questions. But oftentimes, if you're really unsure about something, just comparing the answers to each other is a way that you can sort of maybe buy a mark or two here and there. And the explanation is basically what it said. So B and C are both accurate responses. Therefore, D is the correct answer. Yeah, pretty mean questions. Okay. Please feel free to jump in the chat if you guys have any queries on that, and I'll try and just run through. Unit 2 is a lot faster, so I'll try and be as quickly as I can. But also, if you guys have any questions, mark@haladhealth.org. Please shoot me and I can talk you through it, or maybe if you want to stick around after this, I'm happy to jump on for a little bit if you guys have any specific question. Okay, Unit 2. So as I mentioned, I made this after going to a brewery, and they had, on the menu, they had IBUs, and I asked the bartender what they were. She wasn't too sure, so I thought I'll show you and I'll make some Gamsat questions about it. Anyway, and okay, so basically here I've overly worded it up, but essentially, not a lot in the first bit. Here, I think, is when it really starts getting important. So that's part of the question. I think question 6 relies on this, and it's sort of an interpretation. So hopefully you guys, as you're doing these questions, you can sort of see I'm testing different things. I've got some math stuff, got some interpretation, I've got some pattern recognition, and I thought this was just a good sample of things that the Gamsat can throw at you. Your questions on the day might not exactly have this, but if you're comfortable with these elements, I dare say you'd be comfortable with Gamsat questions. And then here, sort of this information is important for the last question. So look, you could get 2 of the 3 questions in this exam, in this STEM, without reading this. I think you can maybe even get 3, but I think if you spend a minute going through that, I think it just pays dividends come towards the end. Okay, so here we've got 2 graphs, and this really is a little bit of a red herring, this stuff. So where it really comes into play here is question 5. So which of the following compounds is most likely represented by the R in iso-alpha acid? So if anyone's done organic chemistry before, R really just means like a hydrocarbon. It can represent the letter H, but it's likely to have some form of carbon and hydrogen in it. So that is one of those things that you just need to know. But if you look up any sort of functional group or anything like that, it'll often have like R, the O or whatever, like some form of that. But basically R just means carbon, hydrogen, something like that. So immediately with that, I'm crossing out D, just because I don't believe that it's not likely to represent bromine. Okay, now this is the sort of question where you like kick yourself if you didn't think of it at the time. But basically, all you really need to know about carbon chemistry is that a carbon can have 4 substituents off it. So if we just draw this part of it here, right? Got our double bond O, so our carboxyl group, and then we need to figure out what can be this R group here. So the carbon's got one thing off here, and then we've got our group here. So B has 2 carbons, C has 3 carbons, A has 4 carbons. So I can just build up my answer from here and eliminate them sequentially. So if we put 1 carbon, 2 carbon, and we build these up with hydrogen, so So I'll go back to my draw. This carbon now has 4 substituents, so this is going to be an H. This is going to be an H. And I sort of, I'm pretty comfortable with drawing my molecules because I did chemistry all the way through school and in uni, but please do it however you want. I usually just do sort of like that to myself to represent an H, but technically it should be like this. So if we want to make sure that each carbon has 4 substituents off it, so 4 bits coming off it, that's how it would look for 2 carbons, right? So 2 carbons there. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hydrogens. This is C2H6, so it can't be that because this carbon, it cannot have a 4th hydrogen coming off it. So we go to our next answer then. If we build it up along the chain, build another carbon, keep doing our hydrogens. Same thing. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hydrogens and 3 carbons. Can't be C3H8. And then if it was a 4th carbon, 1, 2, 3. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hydrogens, right? So that's where C4H9 comes from. A bit of a tricky question, but sort of hopefully you can see it's. So I'm just getting a question from Sindrani. So how can you explain option C for question 4, faster cooling and increased risk of frostbite related to adipose tissue? Okay, yeah. So, sorry, just going back to it. So basically, number C, due to increased insulation. So we're talking about more overweight people, adipose tissue. The fat is a very good insulator. They would lose core body heat more slowly. Think of wearing a big puffy coat. And are therefore, due to increased insulation, less heat flows through the skin. It's kind of the inverse relationship, right? As you have more insulation, you're going to get less heat flowing through the skin. Because the blood's not flowing around, the blood is providing that warmth. So therefore you're getting faster cooling. You still have the external temperature providing the cooling. You're not getting blood flowing through to the skin in the peripheries. And therefore you're at greater risk of frostbite than an individual with less adipose tissue. So it's kind of like an inverse relationship. As you have more fat, you're more protected from an internal perspective in like your internal organs, but your external extremities are more susceptible. So it's kind of like as you gain one, you lose the other. And that was what I was talking about in the introduction. More adipose tissue means let's blow through. Yeah, sweet. So Urges just covered it. Awesome. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense. If you're really confused about it, we can say it around after, but I do want to just try and wrap up so as not to take everyone's night up. Okay, question 6. Compared with beer that has a shorter boil time, a longer boil time beer would have which of the following? Now, these questions are really annoying, and you'll get them all the time in the Gamsat, where you have to just compare each of them. So I've got lower, higher, alpha acids, iso-alpha acids, iso-alpha acids, increased, unchanged original gravity. And with these ones here, I sort of do little like drawings on this. So I'm going to go, okay, lower, I've got alpha, things like that. Just something to make sure that when you're doing these, you don't make a mistake. And to be like, this question's sort of hard to tutor because it is sort of just a reading interpretation question, but just read out what I've got here. Implicit in the first paragraph is the idea. The general rule of thumb with bitterness is the longer the boil and the more hops you put in, the higher the IBU. As boil time increases, alpha acids are converted to iso-alpha acids. Therefore, the ppm of alpha acids decreases. So we're going from the alpha acids into the iso-alpha acids, aka a higher IBU. So it's kind of relating the two things. More of a section 1 skill, but anytime you get direct text evidence, bring it in, because as I say, they always talk about how like you don't like the start, like you can work with everything that's in the Gamsat. That's what it means, is that there's direct text evidence. So I'm using something that I've explicitly said in the introduction, in the STEM, to relate to a question. And so that eliminates questions B and C. So lower iso-alpha acids is equal to higher alpha acids, right? Because one goes into the other, so they're the same thing. So kind of with these ones, you can knock these two out. And then here we're comparing, so lower alpha acids is the same as higher iso-alpha acids. And then here we're comparing the original gravity. So, and then here, up to here in the answer, original gravity is related to the fermentable and non-fermentable substance in a beer wort before fermentation, right? So sort of a little bit of understanding here, but that's relating to, like, that's prior to the boil time, right? So it's a little bit of a trick. Like the boil time would have no effect because it's a quality prior to the boil time, so it has no impact. So hence unchanged original gravity. Just a bit of a sort of tricky interpretation question, but you will get these more often in biology questions. But I think just having and it's a skill that translates well to section 1. What does ppm stand for? Parts per million. Sorry, it should be, don't know if it's explicitly stated in the question. I apologize, it's not. Okay, well, ppm is probably something that they might give it to you. Just if you can sort of know these, there's a lot of like borderline things in the Gamsat where like it just helps to know it. Like for example, okay, 10 to the negative 9 is a nano is the prefix, so n. Like they may tell you that, but just know your prefixes and things like that. I think ppm sort of in the same ballpark of it. And don't put too much pressure on yourself to know everything straight away. These things just come over time. You'll come across it. Hopefully you remember from now on what ppm means. Okay, what percentage sugar would be expected in a slightly hoppy beer with an IBU of 50? Okay, so here we've got slightly hoppy beer, IBU of 50. I didn't run through it as quickly, didn't go through it so much with this time, but if I'm spending a little bit of time taking in this graph, same thing. We look at our units, we've got our IBUs down the bottom, we've got our original gravity on the y-axis, and then we've got 5 different colors which relate to it pretty clearly here. This graph's nothing, too confusing. So what was it? Sorry, slightly hoppy beer IBU of 50. So slightly hoppy is our, I don't know, I'm not good with, I'd say light green, but I'm not particularly good with my colors, and an IBU of 50. So got our 50 here. We go through to light green, somewhere in this range, somewhere between 1.08 and 1.095. Now, I don't think it was explicitly stated here. Here we are. Water has a gravity of 1.0. Stout has a gravity reading of 1.09, which means 9% denser than water. It was as much as I could spell it out without explicitly stating. That's going to relate to the sugar involved in it. So we've got between 1.095 and 1.08, which is going to be 8% of sugar and 9.5% of sugar. 9's the only answer between that. So look, a little bit of sort of, I don't know, extrapolation, I guess you'd sort of call it as a skill, but just like being able to sort of take what's around you and go, even if you don't really understand that, hopefully you can go, okay, well, 1.095, 1.08, and we've told us here that it's 9%, okay, that's, even though I'm not exactly sure why, I've got 2 minutes to answer this question. I think 9's the most likely answer. So, yeah, hope that's sort of bit of a throwing some mud at the wall, some questions from the Gamsat that I thought gave just a nice little sprinkle of, they're probably going to be different to the ACER papers if you guys have done that. Those are 10-year-old questions. They dress them up with new fancy covers, but they don't actually change the questions. I found these, if not like replicated Gamsat questions, at least had the skills and sort of challenges in it that I found for the best like Gamsat questions. And yeah, hopefully you guys sort of something you've seen in that mirrors something you've seen in some practice questions or some skills, or, if you guys have done the Gamsat before, hopefully there was some sort of crossover. Yeah, do we have any questions? So I've just been talking at you guys for a while, and I appreciate the ones who've stuck around all this time. While we wait for chats to come through, Sarah, do you have any sort of closing remarks?
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Yes, feel free to send through any other questions that you might have. You are also more than welcome to email Mark any questions you have. Is that all good, Mark?
Yeah, please do, guys. mark@haladhealth.org. Yeah, more than happy to answer any questions. I went through a bit of a atypical journey to get through here. So if someone asks me questions sort of on a bit more personal thing, more than happy to just talk to you guys about it. It's a really challenging process, but I found it really rewarding. So please, any questions you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are always welcome to ask any of our tutors about their experience getting into med. We do have quite a few tutors who are all at different med schools. So if you also have a particular med school you want to ask questions about, and they're not one of the tutors you've seen tonight, feel free to send us a message and we'll try and find someone who can have a chat to you, because I know that sometimes it's tricky to find those sorts of mentors that you might be looking towards. So that's something that you're welcome to do as well. I'm just going to put some links in the chat for you. So At the bottom of these links, you'll be able to get all of the answers for tonight. I'll also email them to you within the next 24 hours along with this recording if you want to look over anything again. Also, if you would like to enroll in one of our courses, that discount is no longer applicable. That was when we were doing some partner work, but you can enroll and there's still classes available. I'll just quickly show you which classes. I'll skip screens to find. So we have these classes running. So Prav, Mark and Grace you saw tonight, and a nice follow-on from tonight is next week we'll have another free event as well, and you'll get to meet some of the other tutors. So you'll meet Amlan and Max, and I think you'll meet Steph or Mish as well. So that's an opportunity for you to get to meet some of the other tutors too. So I'll finish there, but did you want to answer the rest of the questions, Mark? I think there's one about practice.
Yeah, just about physics questions. Okay, so I guess the sheer answer is that we have a lot of this stuff in our intensives. It can be a little bit tricky just with copyright. So like, for example, I have access to like Dropboxes and stuff that friends sent me. It's a little bit of a tricky position being in a sort of a, like through a tutoring thing where I'm not particularly comfortable sort of sending copyright stuff. But if you sort of, I would say first points of call would be Reddit Gamsat. I found that really helpful. I forget the name of it. What's the Paging Doctor? I think it's another like good forums where you can meet people and share stuff. Where through those avenues, I got a lot of stuff. Even just talking to friends at uni, if you speak to enough people who do it, or if you have anything like that, they'll have resources. We have a ton of stuff in Halad if you sign up for our things, and we all make questions. We have a lot of past exams, but just the specific resources that I have, I unfortunately can't share them if that's okay. But yeah, I think Sarah's typing some stuff up now. But I think honestly, like so much of what I got for like resources and useful things, just talking to people. I met a girl at a music festival. She gave me access to stuff. I met a girl at a party who put me onto a tutor. Through a mate I worked at a pub with, got me onto Halad. So just talking to people is honestly like over time. And I think that also prevents you from just getting flooded with stuff that like I had a lot of stuff that I didn't get through just because I got 10 trillion practice exams and stuff. So yeah, but like if you sort of just talking to people, that I think that's the best way to do it. You can look up physics year 12 questions. I don't think that's best use of your time, to be honest. But yeah, anything to add, Sarah?
I would say I know that some of you have already signed up for things, but regardless of whether you sign up or just use free resources, have a study group, have a group of people. If you don't know anyone personally, there's a bunch of Facebook groups you can sign up to some with. People will help you practice, and you try and find people who have different strengths to you. So I really struggled with physics as well. And I just had a friend who was amazing at it. And then my strength I could sort of help him with as well. And I just bring every question I had to him and we work through it together. So build a study group. I know that you Taz are doing the courses. You'll definitely be able to find people in the classes as well who are happy to meet up for like an hour a week and work on stuff together too. So that's also an option. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for tonight, guys, and really appreciate you putting. I know it's a long 2.5 hour shift at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Put mine in now. Good timing. My roast pork and pumpkins ready.
No worries. It'll be everyone tonight, just like their first name at haladtohealth.org. So there's Grace and Pravind as well. This is Pravind's name. It's a bit trickier to remember. But yeah, literally, if you send a message to me or also Carleen, she does our operations and mans a lot of our chats, then we can also get you to the right person if there's someone that you want to have a chat with.
Awesome.
Cool.
Much love, everybody.
Thanks
so much for tonight.
And thank you everyone for coming along. We'll hopefully see you around, see you at next week's event, maybe. Oh, awesome. Nice to see you coming in from UK. Perfect. All right, we'll go and have a good evening / morning day in the UK. And yeah, feel free to contact us if you need anything. It's nice to meet you all. Bye.